welcome back to another episode of the ICIS Energy Foresight podcast. It's the first episode of 2025, and for that we're gonna talk about what is gonna be the main topic, what was probably already the main topic at the end of 2024, but it's definitely gonna be the main topic of 2025. Artificial intelligence, Gen AI, and power consumption from data centers. We are recording this during the CES, the Consumer Electronic show in Las Vegas, and just a few hours ago, NVIDIA presented the new super chip and the new supercomputer that will allow users to use AI on remote systems. So a lot is happening, and the data center world is just a growing market with a lot of different numbers floating around in terms of power demand growth coming from that. With me, I have Luca Urbanucci, which is senior analyst at ICIS, and has worked on a paper, a research paper that we published at the end of 2024, investigating the power demand growth from data centers in Europe. Welcome, Luca.
Good afternoon, Matteo. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I'm going to ask you a few questions around our research paper and numbers, but I think the starting point is to try to frame the problem, because there is not one specific number, there is not one consensus around what's the current demand, electricity demand coming from data centers. Can you help us understand where we start from? What's the current consumption?
Yeah, sure. There are no official statistics at the moment. Our research concluded that the data centers accounted for about 100 terawatt hours of power demand in Europe in 2024. We estimated 96 terawatt hours. And to put that in context, it is roughly 3.1% of the total European power demand. What is interesting is that the power center demand is pretty consolidated in a very small group of national markets. The first 5 countries in terms of consumption account for over 60% of the total European demand. And these countries are Germany, France, the UK, but also Ireland and the Netherlands. And what is also interesting is that data centers are not spread evenly across national territories, but are concentrated in metropolitan areas. So you may have heard of the FLAPD market, FLAPD, which is the acronym for Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, and Dublin. And this acronym is in fact used to refer to these 5 key cities that are at the moment the main hubs for data centers in Europe at the moment. And what is also interesting is that while in big countries like Germany, the UK, and France, data center demand accounts for around 3 to 5% of the total national demand, this share is much higher in Ireland, up to 18% of the national consumption. So we could say that Ireland is an outlier, an exception here. And this has been likely driven by the attractive business environment. So low corporate tax rates, skilled workforce that attracted big tech players like Amazon, Google, Meta, the usual name. And just to conclude on this one, at the other end of the spectrum, there are countries such as Italy, Austria, Poland, Spain itself, which despite being populous nations, show a quite low share of data center demand at about 2%, which is below the European average. However, the trend is already changing for some of these countries.
That is super interesting. I think it's surprising to see like countries like Ireland be registering such heavy concentration, probably you would have expected, obviously, to have a lot of data centers in Ireland, but numbers are quite significant. And I actually have a question around that concentration, but let's build on your point on future prospects. In our research paper, we forecast that the current demand is set to more than double by 2035 and reach something like 5.7% of the overall power consumption. So it might not seem a lot if you look at in terms of absolute volumes, but if we believe that this level of concentration is set to remain, that might present some interesting numbers and evidence that we might need to look more in detail. But can you tell us a bit more about our forecast and what are the overall trends that we see unfolding?
Yes, sure. I mean, the data center power demand in Europe has been growing at around 10% per year in the last few years, and we expect the trend to continue at least for the next 2 or 3 years. So by 2027, which is a timeline where it's realistic to make this kind of projections, we expect the data center power demand to be at around 130 terawatt hours in Europe. So around an increase of roughly 30% in the next 3 years. But we also have tried to make some longer term projections based on a bottom-up methodology. So overall, we are projecting demand from data centers in Europe to reach about 235 terawatt hours by 2035, compared to the current roughly 100 terawatt hour per year, as mentioned earlier. So yeah, more than double. And this increase in demand will, of course, come along with an increase in the data centers capacity from the current 9 gigawatts to about 27 gigawatts in 2035. And this, of course, will be driven by a combination of rapid growth in the amount of data produced, as we are already witnessing, and the rise of artificial intelligence as well. However, similarly to the current situation, the data center market in Europe is expected to be dominated by a rather small group of countries over the next decade. We expect the top 10 national markets to account for around 80% of total power demand, so that the remaining 18 countries will account for the residual 20%. In particular, we see the largest West European markets like Germany, France, Great Britain to keep taking the lion's share, and that should not be surprising given the size of these countries. To give you an idea, these countries alone are expected to cover about 40% of the market in 2035. However, at the same time, there are smaller markets that, for various reasons, are set to see a pretty big jump in data center capacity. And I'm mainly thinking about the Nordics here, especially Denmark and Sweden. Indeed, we project the Nordics to almost double their share of European data center capacity from the current 11% to about 20% over the next 10 years. On the flip side, Southern and Eastern European markets probably won't have as big of an impact on the market, with Spain being the main exception. In fact, we expect Spain to start taking on a more significant role in the data center space in the coming years. And to conclude on this question, on this longer-term view, small countries such as Ireland, the Netherlands, which currently cover quite a large share of the market, will continue to play a relevant role, but probably to a lesser extent compared to the past.
That is quite interesting, Luca. And I think, as you correctly pointed out, what we can safely assume or predict the future outlook for the next 3 years, because it's basically a bottom-up exercise. It's a little bit more questionable or open to a lot of assumptions. What is the future outlook when we move past 2030 specifically? Because obviously there are a lot of drivers that play a different role. The development of AI being one, technological improvements being another, and so forth. But if we stay within the next 5 years, and we look at our forecast, we can say there is a lot of the same, more of the same when it's about big industrial, large populated areas, like big metropolitan areas, as you correctly pointed out. At the same time, we see some new trend emerging for countries like the Nordics and Spain. I think it would be interesting to dig into the drivers that we have considered in our analysis that are actually producing the results. Can you help us understand a bit more what are those micro drivers that we are factoring in our modeling and that can help us frame the whole forecast?
Sure. Indeed, the long-term national projections that we have just discussed are the result of a bottom-up methodology, which combines the impact of different macro drivers. In particular, these drivers fall into 4 main categories. So power market driven, weather conditions, economics, and demographics. And in general, one of the main drivers is generically the size of the country, which has 2 main implications. The first implication is the total power demand of a country. So the higher it is, the more the country can host data center capacity without impacting significantly the power system. And the second one is the population of the country, which in turn translates into internet usage and eventually in data centers and users. And proximity to users is important to reduce latency. So these combine with generally favorable economic and business conditions. I'm mainly thinking about GDP per capita and advanced digitalization. This makes France, the United Kingdom, and Germany the 3 countries where we expect the highest growth. On the other hand, electricity prices are definitely another crucial driver, as they represent the main operating expense for data center operators. And this particular factor makes countries like Spain and the Nordics particularly attractive. Also for the Nordics, low temperatures are another advantage, as this results in lower cooling consumption. However, it is logical to expect that with the improving efficiency of data center cooling system, this particular factor will start to lose importance in the future. And also, a large availability of renewable energy resources has also a twofold positive impact in terms of attractiveness to data centers. Because on the one hand, it generally results in lower electricity prices. And on the other hand, it's also attractive to developers for sustainability reasons. And I'm thinking about PPAs, for example. So once again, this explains why we see Spain and the Nordics so promising markets for data centers. And of course, a favorable business environment in general is also an important driver in terms of corporate tax rates, ease of doing business, political stability. So when considering these factors, this explains to some extent why Southern and Eastern European countries are generally seen as less attractive.
So if I sum it up, Luca, I think one of the most interesting trade-offs that we are going to observe when we look at data center consumption and the development, obviously, of data centers in Europe over the coming year is the competitiveness of certain markets, which we can obviously look at it from a price angle, lower power prices, versus what we can consider as the upper limit, which is the saturation. What's the maximum amount of capacity of data center capacity that a certain market can actually manage in terms of the overall load. What are those two? Can we identify levers? Have we identified levers where we see a price attractiveness playing a role, like in Spain, as you mentioned, versus maximum saturation levels for countries like the Netherlands or Ireland? Where do we see those thresholds?
So let's start from the price bit. As you mentioned, Spain is already emerging in the data center market, mainly thanks to the low-cost nature of its electricity. To put this in context, in 2024, Spain wholesale prices were on average 15 euros per megawatt hour cheaper than the German ones, over 30 euros cheaper than Polish prices, and over 40 euros cheaper than in Italy. So that's quite a significant difference. And our long-term projections are also showing that outside of the Nordics, Spain is set to have the cheapest power prices in Europe over the next decade. And that's mainly because of the massive amounts of solar and wind that has been installed. And this solar and wind capacity is also directly relevant, since data centers often want to connect directly to a renewable source for sustainability purposes, as we were mentioning earlier. So we know that Spain has emerged as one of the major PPA markets in Europe. So this is definitely another reason. However, something to keep in mind is that industrial prices are also relevant. Industrial prices are, of course, heavily linked to wholesale prices, but taxes and subsidies can also have a major impact. And in terms of the second part of your question on saturation, the challenge is really when the data centers start to account for a very sizable share of a country's total demand. And this can create challenges to the grid and to the overall power system. So it's quite unlikely that this will apply to most countries, either because these countries are not that attractive for data centers, I'm thinking about small Eastern European countries, or because they are such large markets that data centers will remain comfortably less than 10% of total demand. So once again, the UK, France, Germany, Spain itself. However, we do see saturation happening in a couple of markets. The most notable is Ireland, where the saturation is already there. And we see a slowdown in growth because data centers are already close to 20% of total power demand. And the other location to watch are the Nordics. The projections show that data center demand will soon exceed 10% of total demand in Denmark. So we could see saturation there in the next decade.
Thanks for that. I think it is quite interesting phenomena to keep watching. And unlike the US, we have not recorded yet a massive amount of data centers trying to go behind the meter. But we know that there is growing interest to find multiple solutions to some of the bottlenecks that we have identified in our research. And what it's common knowledge when we talk about, for example, grid development and load management across different areas of Europe. But these like technological development and obviously the whole question mark around the future of AI training versus inference and potentially quantum computing. They are all super interesting elements to keep an eye on and keep monitoring. Luca, thanks a lot. It was super interesting. And hope that you enjoyed it. You can find our research paper on our website, ICIS.com, and we'll try to put it in the show notes. And as always, if you want to know more about Energy Foresight, please visit our webpage or get in contact with us. And thanks a lot, Luca. Till next time.
Thanks, Matteo.